Hey everybody, welcome to what's going to be your last week of lectures in this class for History of Women in Sport, because next week and the following week you will hear from each other on your final athlete presentation. So hopefully you listened to the video right before this one that I posted this week, because it gives you a little bit more information about your presentation and the format of that. Um, and then um, and then you can listen to this video, and then really the last video will be the other short one that is posted here this week on women's history of sport at Wittenberg. This one is specifically on women in sport media, and it does go in. I do cover a lot in the PowerPoint that I'm not going to be going as in-depth in here in my lecture, but um, just so that you have a good amount of information, I think we probably would have spent a little more time on sports journalists and broadcasters, sport broadcasters, had we still been in school together and classes together. But because we are not, I have that information there for you and to learn a little bit about, but I'm not going to go as in depth into that. Because to me, the more intriguing component of women in the media, is the representation of female athletes in the media. And so the first, I mean, the really 75% or three quarters of that PowerPoint that's posted is really about um, how women have been used in media and portrayed in advertisement and ad designs, magazine designs, and then how that then translated into how we really still view the use of women as objects more primarily in sport media coverage. How we cover them as athletes really hasn't changed how we've seen the role of women in media in general over history. And you can see that from the start of like the first few ads that I use on the first screen, the Menins ad and then the Snyder pork and beans ad, and how even in those early 1900 magazine advertisements, we're using women to help advertise health and beauty, food, soft drinks, cigarettes, ready to wear clothing, and just all kinds of consumer products. So we're using women in a consumable type of an imagery, that we then so that's what we do, is we commodify women in that way. We make them a commodity, something that we can consume and purchase for our use, our pleasure. And even from the beginning, when we look at these first couple of images, the the portrayal of the female form or the woman, the stance that she is in, has a sensibility that she's pulling us in for our reaction and for our enjoyment. She is there for our enjoyment, not because she's gaining something from the product that is being advertised in the ad with her. And we're going to see how that just develops more and more as time goes on in using women in print and print ads in particular. Because when the next set of ads that I use are the 1930s magazine advertisements that are pretty um, have a nice like streamlined imagery to them. They're like, in terms of like an artistic design, from an artistic design aesthetic, they are nice and clean and very sharp images that are really quite attractive to look at. But it's interesting the use of emphasis and pop of color, and the color that they choose to use quite frequently was red. And how when we think of red, so the symbolism of red, and how we think about, or what we think about red sort of portrays to us as a viewer and as a consumer, is an interesting choice when you pair it with a female. And again, a female that in both of these cases, one I think on the right looks pretty coy, and the one on the left looks pretty seductive. And so these women in their poses Well, in athletic settings, right, the one in the ice skating setting and the one in the golf setting don't particularly come off as athletic. They're very lean figures. They're very demure sort of stances, or this sort of sensual stance that the one on the left is taking. Even with like the wisped off sort of ribbons from her shirt collar on the left hand side is just a really interesting choice of portrayal of that female. So we have here the initial images of females used, how we can start to understand how and why women are continued to be used in this way and portrayed in this way, sort of their standard imagery, and how it relates to the viewer and the consumer that is looking at these images. And going on to the next slide and noticing again, this use of the female form here on the left hand side. Again, some romance. It's not the woman's face we get to see in this case, it's the man's face, and we see the female being pulled in, you know sort of quaintly through the tennis racket, over the tennis net. Love at first serve, or like something cheesy like that, of course, is what we kind of think of. But yeah, just the very thin, extremely thin figure of the female. That little use of red, that swooping red across her head. An interesting choice of design choices that are being used there. And then the one on the right hand side, I like to include that one because here we have kind of the start of this idealized female form, and of course it's connected to a magazine that has to do with correct eating and strength. So here we are with this, and this is a very classic female form, like literally classic, like art classic form from like antiquity, so like Greek antiquity and Roman antiquity. When we look at artifacts from those civilizations and how they used to form the female figure in sculpture, this is literally what those figures looked like. This female woman is typically what these classical images of these women looked like. These, the sculptors typically of like goddesses, Greek and Roman goddesses. They had these like contrapposto forms where their weight was slightly shifted by the extrusion of the one hip poking out, and then the one leg slightly in front of and bent slightly ahead of the other leg. It gives this, what that pose does is it, number one, and for those sculptors this was important, is that it gives you the sense of weight, that there's this weight distribution in this form. And so for a 3D sculptor from classical times and from antiquity times, this was important because it gave that image a sense of three-dimensionality, right? It had weight, it had this form to it. So that was the first reason for that. But the other reason is because then when you put that woman in this S curve, this sort of like curve where her body goes from shoulders over here, and her torso down, and then her hips go out, and then her legs go back over, you create a very like sensual curve to the form, to this contour that is quite beautiful, right? It's sensed to be a beautiful way to look at the human form and the female human form. So it is a really interesting choice, a very peculiar choice of this woman on front of this magazine cover, with the title of Correct Eating and Strength, because this is what we would consider an idealized form, that of course the implication is how you eat properly and how you gain proper strength to have this correct image, or this idealized image. And of course, the drapery around that woman too, again in this red color, but that drapery is also very classic in its selection. That type of like Greek draping of the fabric is also a very classic selection. So, again, we see this sort of implication that we know what's best for women, what they should look like, what this ideal image is like, and it's like literally all been downhill since then, because we as women have been so influenced by what the media portrays as perfection, and we have been so inundated with what that image looks like, even since as early as the 1920s, 1930s, when we saw these advertisements in print. And then when you move up into like the 50s and the 60s and the 70s, and we see more and more products being sold, again, commodification of women, and products being sold with female images as part of the intrigue and the draw in by consumers, we see again that women, it's like, are we focused on the product, the actual product we need to consume, or are we consuming the image of this woman with that? Is it about her? Is it about creating this sensuality that pulls us in and makes us want this, have this desire about this product? I think about the images on these next few slides, and they all kind of have the same question in my mind, is like, do we even know what these images are actually advertising and promoting? Because for me, I don't even notice those things at first. What I notice is the use of the human figures in these images. So if you kind of click through the next couple of slides, you'll see what I'm getting at here is like, I don't like, at first I'm so kind of drawn in and really looking at what's happening with the female images that are used on these ads, that I kind of forget that there's a product also being sold. I mean, on the first one where the women are playing sort of this leapfrog, hopping over this one man and this group of women that are, chasing him and hopping over him. It's a jeans ad for Levi casual, casual wear. And to the right, Vital Women, they are the women that fascinate men. That whole headline, and then the woman with the cape like red drape around her, and of course, this sort of lots of exposure of skin and this little skimpy blue dress. And it's an ad for Wonder Bread. I mean, it's so like really strange. I mean, this is very bizarre. And then you go to the next screen and you see, this woman and her reflection in the mirror, and she's putting on deodorant, but there's just like this extra short tennis skirt, which, is a typical like sport attire. But that, sort of, it's not even like the fact that she's spraying her arm. I wouldn't even honestly think at first that this is what this advertisement is for. I would feel like I'm in her dressing space, her locker room space, her dressing room, watching her get ready, and then realize like, oh, this is actually an advertisement for a product, a consumable product. Of course, the same thing with the Maidenform bra on the right. Now, of course, I mean, she sort of has this sensual nature to her, and is sort of this, kind of, well, I guess you would say like wild and crazy, and maybe a little fun loving, with the whole like playing of the Wild West type of idea. And it is a bra that she is advertising, so of course for her to be just in her bra and a skirt, and then the rest of the sort of attire, we are drawn to looking at the bra because she's not wearing a top, but it still is like, oh, this is actually an ad for a bra. It's not just this, sort of imagery of this woman and this fun character type of dress or type of mode. And then again, the next images too. I mean, the line forms in the rear. I guess I mean, wow. And even those stripes on those pants, like right to the crack. I mean, what? Like, let's get serious, And it's so bizarre. Really, people, like, if you just objectively look at these things, I mean, this is why advertisers, designers are very smart, because they're using all the conventions necessary to draw our eyes and pull our minds into wanting to look at these intriguing images, and not even realize that at the same time we're being subliminally like messaged about product. And there's a reason why when we use these kinds of images that are sensual and attractive and pull us in, that we then feel for some reason like drawn to those products even though we don't know much about them. We just have this memory about them, right? We go to the store and we're like, what kind of bread should I get? Oh my God, Wonder Bread. Like Wonder Bread comes to mind. So I'm gonna get Wonder Bread, right? I mean, it is the magic of advertisement. It's the magic of design, smart design and good design. But it's also been to the detriment of the people that are being objectified through this process, which are women and have been women for so long. And because that's been the way that women have been treated in imagery, and by the way, this isn't just print imagery and like advertising and marketing, but this has been a long history in art that a woman, the female form, has been used in a way that's very sexualized and objectified to please the male gaze, 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 not the male gaze. That would not really make sense, right? But the male gaze, and so with that, because that's just how the female form from literally back in Renaissance era and the Baroque era, when male artists were painting these nude forms and they were pretty much primarily all female, we came to believe there was this aesthetic quality about the female form that we were attracted to, we were drawn to, and if we used it in conjunction with other images, those other things would also become pleasing to us and we'd be attracted to them. So this is like not novel that these advertisers came up with this idea of like, let's use women in a sexualized way to attract people, because this is what had been happening in the canon of art history for as long as you could go back and see female forms and portraiture, not portraiture, female figures being used in art. So what we see then transfer to how we talk about females in a sporting environment is the sexualization of these women. When we do actually talk about female athletes, which is only 4% of the time in all of media, in every single media format, we only see female athletes covered 4% of the time. Less than 5% of media coverage is dedicated to female athletics and female sports. So while women take up 40%, women make up 40% of like the entire sporting endeavor, right? We have 40% of our athletes that are female. They only get 4% of the media coverage. All outlets of media, 4%. That's a tiny, tiny percentage. It's kind of pathetic. We should be doing much better than that for women, for these athletes, not because they're women, but because they're athletes too, and they deserve better. They deserve better coverage than that. So, and when we do cover them, it isn't to exalt their athletic prowess and their ability. It's to look at what they look like, what their female form presents to us in this environment, in this atmosphere of athletics. So, what the balance of what advertisers have been trying to strike when they're thinking about like when manufacturers and advertisers are trying to create. What the balance that they're trying to strike is how do we uplift female athletes or athletic women and celebrate their strength and their power, but also their beauty and their and their sexuality and their sensuality, because both of those things can be dynamic and beautiful and amazing, and should be celebrated, right? So what we have started to see then is how have marketers, advertisers, designers, how have they tried to strike that balance between not overly objectifying women, but celebrating what they're capable of doing. So I'm talking about the first print media that you see of Nike, and the use of that big glute shot, right, the butt shot that you see on the left hand side, and the full ad. has the print down the that follows the contour or the curve of her glute, and that whole statement talks about why it's important that her butt looks that way. Her butt is big, it's round, like the letter C, and 10,000 lunges has made it rounder, not smaller, and that's just fine. And so it goes on to talk about how I am proud, right? That I'm a woman that's proud of my big butt because my big butt has gotten this way because of how I've trained, right? I have done strength exercises. I have gotten better at, all these physical capabilities, and that has made my butt the way it is. And so the image on the left is the first iteration of that. My big butt, my butt is big. And then the one on the right, or the second image that comes up of the full body, is sort of the redo, the remix, the revamp, or however you want to call that Nike did to try to make it less objectified. Um, Thinking that close up of that image is just like, we're honoring what that part of the body, part of the anatomy looks like. But then they tried to pull it out into that full form, thinking it might be less objectified. My question for you to think about, and you don't have to like write a response to this or anything, but I just want you thinking about, like, does it work? Does it work at all? Like, does it work in the left hand image, the first original image? Does it work in the right hand image? Is one more or less objectified than the other, creating a more or less objectified image? Does this make women feel empowered? I mean, ask yourself that question too. I mean, think about those things because these were very controversial. The first ones that came out were very controversial. If you go to the next screen, you'll see two more of these images. My thighs. I have thunder thighs, and then my shoulders, and both have these. They carry on these little sort of poetic statements that give you this reason why my shoulders are the way they are, why I have thunder thighs, and that I'm proud of them, right? So these received a lot of criticism. They also received a lot of praise. And then the revamp that came out received a lot of criticism and received a lot of praise. It's very interesting. And that's the delicate balance between how do we celebrate women and their strength and their ability and their power as athletes, yet still honor the fact that they can be also beautiful and sexual and sensual and all those things, and it's okay to be both. It's also maybe okay to be either or, not have to be both. And so it's been a very interesting. It's a very interesting campaign to follow. And then also, I think a similar campaign that was done by the Women's Tennis Association asks the same question, or I ask the same questions to you. The Strong is Beautiful campaign by the WTA, is it hitting the mark? Does it really celebrate women's strength and beauty? Does it over sexualize them, over sensualize them? And what I want you to do is click on those names in blue that are on your PowerPoint, and you're going to see these little clips. You're seeing on the screen, you see still shots of the campaign Strong is Beautiful. If you click on the links, you're gonna be able to view short 15 to 20-second ads, commercial ads that were done as a part of this campaign. I'm really curious what you sort of think. I'm not expecting you to submit any kind of response to me, except for if you're just kind of like interested in discussing it and want to shoot me a message. I'd love to chat with you about it, but I'm not requiring you to do that. I always find these to be some of the more intriguing things to talk about in class. And of course, I'm kind of missing out on doing that with you all, but do think that is pretty interesting topic of, like, how do we celebrate both the strength and aesthetic beauty of our female athletes. And then kind of going in through the rest of those ads that I have for you, what I kind of did was switch back to the fact that um, there there is a history of focusing on women in magazines that are sport related. The very first one was the Sports Woman magazine. It covered American women's sports from 1929 to 30, so it really only lasted a year in publication, but it is the first kind of known magazine or like publication that focused on women's sports, and that was, I mean, 1929 and 30, like that's early. It's probably earlier than you thought, but it's also why it only lasted a year in print publication. But then Physical Culture magazine, it wasn't dedicated specifically to women, but it had information about women within its pages, or like programs for women to follow, like exercise programs for women to follow. Physical Culture magazine was really a men's exercise magazine, but it then started to incorporate information for women. So while the Sportswoman magazine was the first historically female specific and women only sport publication, Physical Culture was the first publication to include women, stories about women or for women and women's health. Um, and the publication was in print from 1899 to 1955. So for a long time, Benara McFadden, who was the founder of Physical Culture magazine, started to recognize the importance of including women in the magazine, and these ideas on health and fitness, not for everyone, for men and women. Their little motto was "Weakness is a crime, so don't be a criminal," which I think is kind of a fun, like, little tagline or motto. But I included a couple of these magazine covers for you because, again, I come back around to how we're using these women in these images. They are just particularly humorous to me. I mean, I think of the woman on the left, and when I think of like health and fitness, I don't think of wearing tiny, mini shorts with dress shoes. And the way she's looking down at those images below her that are rather phallic in nature, if you ask me. I probably am a little more sensitive, and you're probably thinking I'm a jokester, but I'm not. I think that that's very intentional. Again, thinking about design elements and how you want to try to make the mind think about how you're drawn into an image. And then, of course, the female on the right with, again, the use of the red, and her waving hair, curly hair in the back, and she's probably doing some archery, but at that implied line going right across her chest, and her fingers pointing right across her chest up towards what I suppose is the release of the arrow. But it's interesting, we don't see that part of it. We just have this implied line from her two fingers across her chest with that big old gaping V-neck that she's wearing, up into the upper right hand corner of the page. So again, you're probably, some of you are probably thinking like, Coach, you're being kind of sensitive, but I'm not. I suppose I could be. If you want to think that, that's fine. But I think you need to see, like, this is the precedent set on how we used and utilized women, and so even in times where we were trying to place women in a setting where their physical well-being was important and at the center of what we were discussing, we still use them in a very sensual and sexualized way. And it hasn't really changed. When you think about today's images on health and fitness magazines, like women's running and women's health, I mean, look at what those women are wearing. Look at how we crowd them with this text of like how to make your body perfect, how to have phenomenal abs, how to have a bikini body by summer. It's like these constant messages about what the perfect image should be of women, just hasn't really changed. And since the time that we started putting female images in print. I think those are just really important things to take a look at. So women represented in the media, I think it's good to just kind of have these numbers. When we think about school reading textbooks, 65% have boys that are represented in physical activities, where only 35% of girls. And you mostly see boys dominating the throwing and catching, and the girls are doing the domestic, or not domestic, I'm sorry, like the more artistic or aesthetic, so dancing, or like they're on the swing sets. 25% of newspaper editors agree with the statement that women are naturally less athletic than men. And 50% of newspaper editors, half of them, believe that Title IX has impaired men's athletics. So we are still in just like a really wild mindset about what women's role in athletics is in our culture and our society. So when you look at then like a 30-day analysis of ESPN's Sports Center, pretty much 48 to 1 the stories are male to female. I mean, it's like it's always been that way. It's never gotten better. I wanted to give ESPN a little bit of like, I just wanted to cut them some slack and be like, you can do it, ESPN, but man, they just don't cover women's sports. Um, I don't like boycott them because, of course, I enjoy getting my sports stories from them and I like Sports Center, but I just can't. It's just so hard for me to believe that they can't find a way to cover more women's stories. It's just really bizarre to me. So you can also see the information about Sports Illustrated, and of course, they just don't cover. They also don't cover or put on the cover women. And just not a lot of magazines talk about women and their achievements. So part of this is that we need more women talking about athletes because women will cover women and they'll share their stories. And so we need more women journalists, sports journalists. We need more women writers, and we need them to be willing to tell the stories of the people that look like them. Um, and but also we need the male writers to also find it important to let the readers know and to the consumers and spectators to know that women athletes are worthy of our attention and our time, right? So I do have a couple of slides of female sport reporters that are notable. Melissa Ludke, Tracy Dodds, Joan Ryan, for example, Lisa Olson, Paola Boivin, Karen Kraus. They all kind of have interesting stories. I do have a reading attached that talk about many of these women and kind of their roles within sport reporting. But these women are like, they were the first, like they're the pioneers. They're the women that were the first ones to get into the locker rooms and have wet towels flung at them and jock straps thrown in their faces and guys walking by and pulling each other's towels off so that all of a sudden they're exposed and the female reporters are standing in front of them trying to get a quote or two from a post-game interview. They're the ones that had to deal with the discrimination of not being allowed in the locker room or not being allowed in the press box. There's all kinds of discriminatory actions that were taken against these women, and some of them pretty brutal. Like in the case of Lisa Olson, she has one of the more extreme stories that are just terrifying, that she had to go through it, literally leave the country because it was so bad and she was treated so poorly, to just the simple like feelings of isolation like Karen Kraus talks about, and that there weren't there's if you're a female reporter out in California, you're probably the only one in that entire state. So you feel very isolated and alone, and how hard that is to do your job if you don't have male counterparts that are respectful to your ability and your talent as a reporter. So if you read the excerpt that I have for you, you'll get more information on those women. They are all very interesting and intriguing and certainly paved the way for current female reporters today, and thankful for the work that they've done. Likewise with female broadcasters, the three that I have listed there are the three I think most important ones: Phyllis George, Leslie Visser, and Christine Brennan, because again, they are the women who literally set the stage for female broadcasters to come. And so their stories are also equally amazing and intriguing. Leslie Visser and Christine Brennan are still reporting today in some capacity. Christine's doing a lot more writing. She doesn't. She sort of does. And if you looked at the link that I put on Moodle a few weeks back when I asked you to submit your own women leaders, she's one of my favorites. She's just amazing. She's an incredible writer. She's always spot on in my opinion. She's just really terrific, and she's just always pushing the envelope and getting us to think about how like what kind of examples are we setting for future generations or other cultures if we're not continuing to show our ability to have equitable treatment towards women in any venue, but particularly within sport. So I just really think she's fabulous and terrific. And so if you didn't look at that link that I had set up there a few weeks back on Moodle on her, definitely check it out now. And just pay attention when you see things by Christine Brennan, because she's out there all the time. She's covering everything, all the things, not just female, but lots of different stories in the sporting world. And so the last little slide then is just women in media. Again, just some statistics that I think are worth it to know, for you to know, and to realize, like, again, we are just really, we're just really down. We're not anywhere we should be in terms of exposure of women, female athletes in sport. We don't honor the women, female athletes the way we probably should. Not probably should, that we should. We don't. You know, we just can do a better job of recognizing that their strength and power is something to celebrate and to behold, and to not be intimidated by, or to feel like it's wrong inherently, or just physiologically that it's not right. So, yeah, so I hope you take some time to, look a little bit more closely at some of the images I shared, some of the materials I posted for you to read, um, and just educate yourself a little bit more on some of the ways in which we shortchange female athletes in the media, and how we treat women in the media in general, and how we portray them, and kind of just glorifying one type of image for women, and really miscasting how every person is unique and individual, and what might work for some doesn't work for all. Might work for one doesn't work for anybody else, right? So I think that that's an important thing about this too, is that we don't have to portray women in just one way. We can think about the beauty of diversity, and how the many different ways that women are and exist, and how we should continue to reflect all of them in our media world. So I hope you enjoyed it, learned a little bit, and if you want to chat about any of it, I would love. Yeah, I miss you guys, so I would just love to chat. If you want to shoot me a message, I'm happy to chat anytime. So, one more little video after this one on women's sport history at Wittenberg, and then you can be just working and focusing on your final project.